5 seconds or minutes?
Yes, seconds.
T20 Saudi Arabia and the Center for Strategic Studies present T20 Summit Season 2020. Today's event is the Task Force 9 Migration and Young Societies webinar. Welcome you all to our webinar. This is Mohammed Romezan, the coordinator of this task force. We would like to begin this webinar by inviting the lead co-chair of the task force, Her Royal Highness Dr. Maha Al Saud, the Vice President for External Relations and Advancements at Faisal University, to say her welcome remarks. The floor is yours, Your Highness.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I would like to welcome you today to our final webinar. We have reached the conclusion of this journey. It has been an honor and a privilege to be part of the T20. A very rewarding experience that brought a global collaboration amongst brilliant minds and dedicated souls from different engagement groups. As we were touched by the COVID-19 pandemic, I believe no other task force focus group were more vulnerable. The challenges that face youth, women, and migrants, whether compulsory or voluntary and planned, were amplified by the economic and educational shutdown, the closed borders, and the overcrowding and the lack of healthcare infrastructure, all struck at the heart of this task force. Our esteemed co-chairs spearheaded the efforts to guide and support the dedicated efforts and of our authors who came up with innovative solutions and fresh new viewpoints to recommend through 10 policy briefs chosen from many to shed new light and new vision to be shared with the G20. The other efforts were commendable, and we value all the contributions and hard work that was involved in this process. And we thank all the authors from all around the world for their efforts. I am delighted with the ties and friendships that were forged with the esteemed co-chairs at this task force. Their guidance and support brought this task force a unity and spirit that became its essence and success. For that, you have my deepest gratitude. We have created a small and short video so that we can share with you regarding this task force. I hope you enjoy it. Assalamu alaikum. I am Maha bint Mashari Al Saud. Under the reign of His Majesty, custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has made remarkable and unprecedented political, social, economic, and developmental achievements. These achievements, which are mainly the pillars of the Vision 2030 reform program, have demonstrated that the Saudi leadership is committed to its pledge to build a state for the future and to consolidate its position in the G20. We have embarked on an era paving the way for economic prosperity and to give the future generations national and international entrepreneurs and luminaries. This year, Saudi Arabia has taken presidency of the G20 summit. As lead co-chair for Migration and Young Societies, it is my role to work alongside some of the world's most renowned international experts that bring to us a wealth of research to help us formulate policy based on evidence.
Since 2015, I've been involved in advising several engagement groups of the G20, the Women 20, the Foundations 20, and foremost, the Think 20. I'm particularly honored that this is my fourth year in co-chairing the Task Force on Migration of the T20. And I would like to congratulate the Saudi presidency and in particular the T20 presidency for its outstanding work and results. The G20 and thus the T20 only put migration and refugees as a topic on their agenda in 2015 under the Turkish presidency. The German presidency in 2016 again put a strong focus on this topic, of course in the light of the so-called European refugee crisis. Argentina continued to work on these related issues of migration with a special focus on gender and education. The Japanese presidency in 2019 embraced migration and aging society and thus mirrored the demographic changes and challenges and the pressing issues that several G20 countries are facing right now. The T20 Saudi Arabia has chosen a new focus, migration and young societies, with a particular aim to look into these challenges and finding solutions for better integration of migrants, in particular the youth. We all acknowledge that the year of the Saudi presidency is a special one, being overshadowed by the pandemic. COVID-19 has strongly influenced all global agendas, and indeed, it also had a particular impact on migrants and forcibly displaced people and their families. Many sectors depend on the availability of migrant workers. So during the lockdowns and travel bans, migrants started to move for many reasons, many of them not having access to healthcare back to their countries of origin. And nobody was waiting for them. Again, no healthcare, no education there. The challenges for the individual migrant workers were really bad.
I was especially pleased to be a task force co-chair at T20 because I've been frustrated in the past with regional policy making, which lacked representation from stakeholders outside of the traditional power structures within the state. My academic work has focused on the integration of marginalized voices into the political arena and the questions of social justice. And being part of Task Force 9, which concentrates on youth and migration, inspired me and expanded my horizons through the well-researched policy briefs and nuanced and timely solutions presented through them by teams of authors from across the globe. With the COVID-19 epidemic proving to us that we need global cooperation to find solutions for health, poverty, education, and the economy, the issues discussed and suggestions that were made through the work of this task force and others participating in T20 are now more pressing than ever, especially if we want to think about the integration of online and virtual solutions for refugee education and to provide urgent medical care for those who need it the most.
It's my pleasure now to announce the opening keynote speech by Dr. Paolo Magri, who is the chair of the T20 Italy. He also is the executive vice president of the Italian Institute for International Political Studies. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Royal Highness. Thank you for this wonderful video. It's a real pleasure and an honor to join this webinar. And let me thank the Secretariat of the T20, and in particular the chair of the Saudi T20, Fahed Al-Turki, and the Center for Strategic Studies. ISPI is a warming up engine as we prepare to become the national coordinator and chair of the Italian T20 in 2021. And I'm particularly glad for the fruitful cooperation with the Secretariat, the Saudi Secretariat, with Kapsar and King Faisal. In this capacity, the one I will have in a few weeks, let me immediately start by saying that we are planning to devote one of next year's task forces to migration for two quite obvious reasons. One is to ensure continuity with important work that has been carried out by task force in previous years. And second is that migration is one of the highest priority in Europe's and Italy's political agenda. It is therefore in our interest as European and as Italians to contribute on how to best manage migration flows, on how to do this effectively so that all parties involved in the process, countries of origin, transit countries, destination countries, and of course, migrants themselves, don't miss out the opportunities that arise from migration while at the same time dealing with these challenges. The Italian presidency is determined to insist on a multilateral approach. This determination to play it multilaterally is something that cuts across all policy topics, but it is most evident in topics such as migration, in which bilateral approaches on legal pathway, on returns, on integration have often failed to produce results. By looking at the policy briefs of this year task force, it is absolutely clear there has been a remarkable work to propose actionable, feasible, and timely policy options to some of the most pressing global challenges on migration, global mobility, and youth. In particular, let me commend your work on education for migrant youth, on migrant integration, and the study of migration trends of younger cohorts. While drafting this policy option, your works and meetings have been disrupted by the pandemic. And inevitably, the pandemic will be hovering around debates during today's webinar. On migration, the pandemic has been the source of three major disruptions that, taken together, shed a dangerous light over the prospect for improving international migration governance in the near future. A disruption in migration channels, a disruption in the international agenda, a disruption in capacity. Just give me a few minutes to go deeper into these three disruptions. The first disruption regarding migration channel has been quite evident for a while. During the worst period of lockdown, and today as well, almost all regular migration channels have disappeared, in particular for south-north migration. As regular migration channels vanished, Italy, for example, experienced a sudden surge in irregular migration from Tunisia. Altogether, 26,000 irregular migrants arrived to Italy by sea this year, as compared to just 11,000 in 2019. Half of them arrived from Tunisia, of which around 80–85% were Tunisian. Many observers were expecting arrival to go down because of the pandemic and fear of being infected. Actually, it was the other way around. The pandemic is fueling migration, and migration of an irregular kind. Tunisia, which relies heavily on tourism, saw its tourist season drop to close to zero, pushing a lot of people to look for opportunities abroad. On the other hand, Italy, as well as many other European countries, suspended regular migration channel, leaving thousands of habitual seasonal workers and the new would-be migrants affected by COVID recession without any option but to migrate irregularly. The second disruption concerned the international agenda. What is happening in Tunisia is the reflection of a dire global situation. The World Bank estimates that by next year there will be 80 to 150 million new poor. Huge. If we look at forced displacement before the pandemic, the UN estimated 80 million people that had been forcibly displaced in the world. This stock of 80 million people is the highest since the Second World War. And yet, it is at the low end of the new poor that will be created by the COVID pandemic in just 1 year, which, as I said, amount to 150 million. Of this new poor, at least 1/3 will be children and teenagers. How should we choose whom to help first? Migrants or the new poor who will not move? We will probably hear many voices worldwide from government, but also from the civil society, asking whether we shouldn't primarily deal with those who will be involuntarily immobile over the next few years, rather than prioritizing migrants. Finally, and thirdly, COVID has brought a disruption in capacity. In the deepest global recession in over a century, advanced countries face decreasing GDP per capita and skyrocketing public and private debt. What's more, even within G20 countries, the recession appeared to be hitting vulnerable categories the most: the poor, women, minority, and younger people. What does this say about the global capacity of G20 countries and their willingness to tackle migration through aid and financial help? Won't we instead concentrate on our own rising domestic inequalities? I'm aware and sorry, I'm mostly posing questions. I don't have a specific answer to this, and I guess that I will leave most of them open for today's debate and also for those which will follow. But let me bring at least one argument to the table. We should never choose to focus on regular, safe migration channel. And by safe, I mean safer also from a healthcare point of view, as the risk of infection is much greater along irregular routes. We should make regular migration fit for a world with COVID and for a post-COVID world. If we don't do that, many other countries might experience what Italy is experiencing with Tunisia this year, and possibly at a much higher scale. This would undermine the delicate social consensus that need to be built on how to best deal with migration flows, and as well as complicating relationship between destination, transit, and origin countries. As you can see, despite you having covered a lot of ground in this year task force, there will be a lot of work that will be needed in 2021. So I encourage you to think ahead to the contribution you can make on how to rethink the international governance on migration and on how to enhance global and national policies for the youth in 2021. We look forward to working with you in Italy next year. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. And now we're going to move to our panel discussions. We're going to have two panels. The first is migration. Can we reshape the future, historical challenges and innovative solution? And the second panel is the future of young societies, the impact of new digital platforms and most vulnerable segments, migrants, women, and children. Beginning with our first panel, I would like to invite the task force co-chair, Dr. Astrid Skala-Komen, Senior Advisor to the German Development Agency, and also the moderator of this panel. Dr. Astrid, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege and honor to moderate this panel with three esteemed panelists. And I very much hope that some of the questions Paolo Magri has outlined, we will at least try to find the starting point and the entry points for answers. As was said, the topic of the panel is the question, can we reshape the future, and historical challenges? And of course, when we say historical challenges, we all think of COVID-19. So firstly, I would like to introduce to you Professor Güven Sak from TEPAF, Turkey. He is not only a co-chair colleague of this task force on migration, but he has been since 2015 very much engaged in the T20, in particular in the task force on migration. And I would even go further and say he's one of the founding fathers of the think tank 20 in general. So Güven Sak, please share with you your ideas or your answers, in particular with regard to labor market integration and the challenges we actually will see and we are suffering, in particular in the times of the pandemic. Güven, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Astrid. Thank you very much for those kind words. Yes, I have been involved since 2015, and I think we are all discussing similar issues with, with minor changes like COVID-19 this time. Let me start by saying that migration and young societies, these issues are first and foremost developing country issues. Although Paolo Magri mentioned Italy as being a kind of a destination country, if you look at around those 80 million forcibly displaced migrants around the world nowadays, 86% of them are residing in a nearing developing country. And Turkey is like that too. So we have around 3.6 million Syrian refugees and more from other countries also. And with the EU agreement, we have turned Turkey from a destination country from a transit country to a destination country, basically. So first of all, it's a developing country problem. And, you know, this problem, the migration and young societies, are not, things are not happening in void, in the absence. So there are many other developments. There are also other global megatrends. One is the technological change that's affecting our countries too. With digitalization and robotization, we already have started feeling domestic inequalities, creating a negative environment for the migrants. We have already started seeing that, and now this problem seems to be getting more serious. This us versus them situation is getting more serious with the COVID-19 related disruption in our labor markets, basically, or let's say the growth prospects and job losses in our markets. So when these global megatrends come together, it becomes a more serious question, more serious problem for all of us, basically. And it is, as Paolo Magri has mentioned, is disrupting also the capacity of the governments, the countries to deal with this situation. That's why I think when I look at this situation, when we look at this situation, there is a strong role now for G20 to deal with a series of, let's say, collective action problems that we are seeing when we look at the situation at hand. First of all, you know, there is the need for a strong healthcare response problem at hand. And individual countries by themselves could not provide a solution to this. So there is the need for G20 to be in the picture with multilateral solutions, bring in more cooperation between the countries to deal with this issue of finding a vaccine or a treatment and widespread use of this in all the countries around the world in an orderly fashion. I think this looks to be the most important issue in order to control disruptions, especially the disruptions in capacity, the disruption in growth process and job losses in our countries. Secondly, I think it is also time to start thinking about how we are going to get out of this process. So there, the process for restarting the growth process, jump-starting the growth process, and also jump-starting the growth process could not be left to the companies alone. So there is the need for a kind of a cooperative framework, a public investment program that is focused on jump-starting the economy and focusing on job creation in our economies in order to lessen the negative impact of COVID-19 on the migration and young societies framework, let me say, in our kind of countries especially. Because if it is left to the companies themselves, the COVID-19 process in the aftermath of, let's say, COVID-19, with the vaccine and the treatment around, I think what we are going to see is there is going to be a kind of a premature digitalization, premature focus on the new technologies because of the negative impact of COVID-19 on the profitability of the companies and also the productivity losses of the companies. That requires then a kind of a strong public investment program to deal with this issue. And again, you know, that's where we need multilateralism. That's where we need some kind of a coordinating agent to deal with this collective action problem at this stage. Because if you leave the solution to the markets, to the companies themselves, what we are going to see is more job losses and more deeper problems when it comes to the migration-related issues. All those debates about us versus them is going to become more important in all our countries. And I think thirdly, another collective action problem is, so one is related with countries, one is related with companies, one is related with debt holders, I think. That's also related with developing countries, since the Argentina's debt default, Argentina's last debt default, let me say, we still in the world do not have a mechanism for, do not have a strong mechanism for sovereign debt rescheduling. I think this is going to be an important issue also, where there is the need for a solution to the collective action problem that we are all going to face in the near future. So I think G20 has a very important role in dealing with this health sector response, the collective action problem related with health sector response on the one hand. Secondly, the collective action problem that's related with the companies, with some focused, like the EU's Green Deal program, the public investment program. Everybody is talking about green transformation, but I think there is the need to focus, to continue this effort to include all the countries around the world and make World Bank and IMF more active in these issues also at the same time. So, you know, when it comes to the problems that are related with COVID-19, it's possible to talk about, you know, the education problems, the growing global inequalities due to the COVID-19. But I think it is now time to start focusing on the aftermath, about how we are going to get out of this crisis too at the same time. And there, let me say, the triple collective action problems that I am seeing can disrupt the strength of a possible growth process and may lead to additional job losses, exacerbating the situation that's in our hands today. So I think that's the main message that I'd like to underline today in terms of, let's say, starting a discussion. But I think we need to focus on not only the disruptions that are already happening, that has already happened, we also need to focus on the disruptions that are going to happen in the near future, because these are kind of time bombs that are eventually going to explode. And I think T20 and G20 has to start establishing some mechanisms, preparing some proposals to deal with these additional, let me say, time bombs, to make the migration issue and young societies issue more problematic for all of us in the coming years. I think we need to focus on what is about to come at this stage. That's how T20 has been working for some time. As Astrid may know from the past discussions, it's good to be ready to deal with the problems that are about to become important. They may not be at the agendas of the governments at the moment, but I think these are the issues that we are going to, deal with in the near future. So let me stop here, Astrid. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sack, very much. We will come back to you. We have ample time for discussion. What I take with me, and relating to my own background in development cooperation, you said it is mostly a developing country problem. Yes, it certainly is a developing country's problem. But if I look at Europe, and Paolo Magri has mentioned it, I think next to Brexit, there is no other topic which is so debated, and there is almost no consensus at all between all the EU member states, the industrialized ones. So we'll come back to your topics of healthcare response, and in particular what you called collective action. And I would like to hear from you maybe later. Do you think the already existing mechanisms, such as the global compacts and the institutions we have in place, they could take over some of the tasks, and the G20 somehow could interrelate, or we can find some sort of joint mechanism? So my next panelist is Ms. Amal El Wasif from Morocco. She is an international relations specialist at the Policy Center for the New South, where she's focusing on mobility and migration. And I think her topic she will share her views on fits very well in some of the ideas you already shared with us, given, because she will talk about African migration in the context of COVID-19. And it has been mentioned, I think, twice, also from Paolo Magri and you, about the increase of poverty. And I think the African continent, which is in Morocco in particular, which is in some sort a destination country, the MENA countries are destination, and at the same time a country of origin, as well as Turkey, by the way. I mean, you have your Syrian refugees, but a substantial number of migrant workers all over the world, in particular also in Europe, where we definitely need them to keep our economies, hopefully sooner or later, booming again. Okay, so Amal, please, the floor is yours. I can see you. It's still Uven on the screen. Can you hear me, Amal?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
Okay.
Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, dear Astrid, and thank you to the organizing committee of the T20 and specifically of the task force number 9 on migration and young societies, on the opportunity to participate in this distinguished panel. And for the purpose of today's presentation, I have chosen to speak on the understanding the constant and the variable in the African migration within the context of COVID-19. And why I choose to speak on this specific topic is, first of all, because at the Policy Center for the New South, we very much focus on the question of African migration, and also because I think that the G20 countries are concerned and they are stakeholders on the question of African migration, because much of the African international migration towards the international happens towards countries that are part of the G20, precisely European countries like France and Italy. So the questions that I will try to answer in the presentation are, first of all, what are the continuing trends in the African migration, and what is changing within the context of COVID-19, and most importantly, what lessons to take from the 220 crisis regarding what to expect. As Mr. Guvensak said, it's not enough to only think about what we live in currently, but also to try to understand what to expect in the near future. So to start with, what is the constant in the African migration? Of course, that it will remain predominantly an intra-African migration, with more than 80% of migration happening within the continent. And of course, there are important disparities between the regions. For example, you will find a lot of movements in West Africa, which is the most integrated region when it comes to mobility and labor mobility, specifically because of the ECOWAS and the protocol on the free circulation of nationals of the ECOWAS countries, then the East African community as well. And then you will find other regions of Africa that are less integrated and where you have less movements, and unsurprisingly, they are in North Africa because of the political context and also because of their proximity to Europe. So here you have the main entry points towards Europe. Second, of course, the fact that irregular migration will continue, as Mr. Magri has mentioned at the opening remarks, precisely towards Europe, because Europe continues to be the preferred destination for African nationals. And of course, everyone is familiar with the push and pull factor theory that explains that most of the international migration, whether it's regular or irregular, happens because of the disparities of development levels between the origin countries and the destination countries, meaning that in origin countries, we have a lot of problems with regard to infrastructures, to the economic development, to social policies, which are pushing their nationals to seek opportunities abroad in destination countries that have better living conditions. So now what is changing with the COVID-19 crisis? And when we want to anticipate the changes and how the African migration can be affected by the COVID-19 crisis, I think it's very important to look at it from the lenses of the 2008 economic and financial crisis. Of course, there are two crises from different natures, but even if the COVID-19 crisis is primarily a health crisis, it also has a lot of ramifications on the economic and financial spheres. So first of all, what struck me doing the research on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis is that there could be contradictory tendencies. So the first two contradictory tendencies is a tendency for more irregular migration towards Europe, but also a tendency for more return. So I will explain each one of them separately. For the first one, when we look at what happened after the crisis of 2008, we saw that more irregular migration happened. And it is true that, of course, all countries have been affected by the crisis, and even European countries were more violently shaken than African countries, but the gap in the levels of development remains very significant, which means that even if European countries were affected by the crisis, they still have more advantages than African countries, which will push the nationals of some African countries to continue to seek the employment abroad, even if the opportunities in European countries will be less, they will still be tempted to continue in this journey. And this is what was mentioned by the interveners before. And also we have seen it in the fact that at the beginning of the lockdown measures, there were not a lot of irregular migration movements in the Mediterranean, but they started to come in quite a violent way, starting from June, because of the some European countries have opened their borders, and then the irregular migration has come to its level of the before the crisis. And the other tendency is the fact that there might be more return from migrants that are already in Europe. And why is this? Is because of also a psychological side to the crisis. As we all know that many immigrants who are living abroad, they have been deprived of the opportunity to return to their countries of origin due to the closure of borders and to the lockdown measures. So if in addition work opportunities are tightened, there is a probability of more return from the African immigrants in Europe. And in this, I can quote the study by the International Organization for Migration on 2010 that shows that the 2 years that followed the 2008 financial crisis saw an increase of 20% in the return rate of immigrants from Europe to their origin countries because of the lack of work opportunities. And I think that we can even witness more return among some profiles of migrants currently in Europe, because also of the fact that this unprecedented crisis of COVID-19 has shown that the possibility to go and to have regular mobility from Europe to abroad was very constrained, and there will be a fear among these migrants of the fact that they could be locked down in Europe and cannot return to their countries of origin. So the ones of them who already have some savings are probably most likely to return to their home countries and try to invest instead of permanently residing in Europe. Moreover, and there's a third important point, the nature of the current crisis could also cause a panic among some immigrants, similar to what we have seen or witnessed in the 90s, following the signing of the Schengen agreements by Spain and Italy. And those two countries, they were previously visa-free for the nationals of North African countries. But when they signed the agreement, they had to impose visa requirements for third nationals of some countries residing in these two countries. And this created a sort of panic among the seasonal workers who used to go and work in Spain, for example, and go back to Morocco. So they decided to just stay and overstay their documents in Spain, because they were fearing if they go back to Morocco, they will be denied access again to Spain, which has sort of increased the presence of irregular migrants in some European countries. So we can also see this trend specifically among the seasonal workers who can fear if they return to Morocco not to be able to return back to Spain. So they could probably try to overstay their residence permits and just stay illegally in Europe.
2 more minutes.
Okay, I'll try to be very quick. So, of course, another important lesson from the 2018 crisis is that the fact that financial crises that are of the magnitude of the one of 2008, and of course the one that we are currently living, they are very likely to initiate some structural changes in the labor market in European countries. I'll give the example of two sectors. The one that's predominantly a man's sector, like the sector of construction, where the job opportunities just became very tight. And then we saw that some workers, immigrant workers in this sector have shifted towards, for example, agriculture in Spain. And we have seen also an increase in the demand of female dominant sectors like healthcare and domestic care. And this is something that I think will be very relevant to the current situation of COVID-19. And that's something that we can monitor closely to understand the changes in the shifts in the labor market, and try to come up with the solutions to adjust. So when it comes to recommendations, of course, and these are some recommendations that I have already developed with my colleague Tayyib Ghazi on the policy brief that we published on the decent job creation in origin countries. I think, of course, most importantly, act on the root causes of migration, and precisely through the elaboration of policies of decent job creation, not, jobs that would pay decent wages and ensure for their employees decent working conditions and social protection for them and their families. And of course, promoting partnership for skills mobility between the different countries from the south and the north. And in this sense, I would give the example of the very recent initiative called For a Global Approach to Migration and Mobility Governance of Labor in North Africa, which concerns the nationals from Morocco and Egypt, who are negotiating, the governments of these two countries are negotiating agreements with governments from Germany and Belgium, and within the umbrella of the European Union who financed the project. So I think that we need more of these initiatives to create legal corridors for mobility to mitigate the context of the crisis. And of course, focusing on improving social policies. I think a lot of what happened with the crisis of the COVID-19 has put the light on the vulnerabilities of social policies and of health coverage. And that's something that European countries can put the focus on when they do their partnerships with origin countries. And of course, and I will finish with this one, the protection of vulnerable migrants and refugees in Europe. The ones who are already living in Europe will be having tough times ahead in terms of finding employment and in terms of their working conditions. So I think that a lot of attention should be given to these categories. Thank you very much. And I'll be very glad to answer any of your questions in the discussion and maybe tackle other points that I could not tackle in the presentation because of the time constraint.
Okay, thank you very much, Amal El Wasif. I think particularly interesting was the analysis of this contradictory tendency of, on one hand, more irregular migrants coming back and more irregular leaving their countries. And I think there's one aspect within it that those coming back, of course, this in decrease of remittances is also a very severe impact of COVID. We have seen not only in Africa, but in Central Asia, for example, where you have often small countries like Kyrgyzstan, 30 or 40% Russian remittances from people in Russia. So this is something we may come back to it. It's still, if I may say so, a lot of analysis, and therefore I'm very much looking forward to our third presenter, because he will share with us a very innovative idea, a global perspective, global burden sharing, and what he thinks the G20 should do to come forward to progress in global burden sharing. So we have Fahad Al-Sharif. He's a senior research fellow of the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. He has done this policy brief together with Manuel Schubert, and we are very eager to learn more about your ideas. Fahad Al-Sharif, the floor is yours.
The mic is off, Dr. Fahad. Could you please turn on your mic, Dr. Fahad? See it down to the left or right.
Okay.
Yes, good.
Can you hear me, Mohammed?
Yes, I do. We all do hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning or afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this great opportunity to be here in the presence of a fantastic number of great scholars. And in behalf of King Faisal Center, I thank you for this opportunity. And as we know, we partnered with CAPSAC for the T20. I also have to thank our leaders on the task force number 9. And I really appreciate the earlier presentation by Paolo, Her Highness, and Astrid, and I hope this will give us some kind of light, will shed a light for the future. Okay, how I did that here.
It would be nice if you could keep the 7 minutes, Dr.
Oh.
Fahad. Yeah?
Okay. I just want to go to my slide.
Okay, try. Okay, thank you. So we have some time for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, this is great. Okay. Today's presentation, the topic that I will talk about, it's not really final. It's just developed enough. It has some elements towards a better and clearer proposal in the future. And it has relied a little bit, or to a great extent, to our policy brief with Dr. Manuel Shepard. I would like to go to the slide. I mean, my PowerPoint, the first one. I'm not controlling it, so I have to say, okay, second one, please. Okay, the COVID-19. Before I say that, I heard earlier, it's a fantastic summation of what really most of the problems that we are facing today. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed our vulnerability as humans to as humans to disease control, and created, whether we like it or not, a state of extreme and complex interdependence due to our socioeconomic needs and capacity. We live up in a proximate geographically, and we are most countries now are connected by air, land, and seas. The pandemic caused economic and psychological pressures on all population, whether sending, receiving countries, native citizen, foreign expatriates, and the undocumented migrants in that they are almost all over the world. Definitely the topic relates to the migration from Africa, Tunisia, Morocco to, the European side, crossing the Mediterranean. It is also related to some past research I have been involved that deals with migrants or from Africa that go to Horn of Africa, cross the Red Sea to Yemen as a transit country, and come to Saudi Arabia and other countries. So these cross bordering and it's all over the world. In our policy brief discussed in our last meeting, we had some points on burden sharing about the policy in general, which is management of the provision of allocation of refugee host capacity, efficiency, creation of international exchange platform that balances the national interests and capabilities of its member states, maximizing of cooperation and incentives for state to join the treaty, support of G20 leaders in finding actionable policy solution to cope with the consequences of forced migration, and to invite interested parties. What I'm suggesting today is derive its momentum from that one, which is burden sharing, for instance, and the involvement of international, other international bodies in solving the issue, especially under the issue of migration, especially under the COVID-19. I have to say something about the history, especially for younger generation interested in migration studies, that what we live now is a product of history. For instance, the migration issue since our early societies to our present time. It went through many different stages, great events, wars, and treaties. These are listed in this slide, if you can see it, and all contributed directly or indirectly to the way we react to disasters or wars. I wish I have a control of my own. I'm sorry. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, these different historical events have caused a lots of damage, but as humans, we always came up with some kind of solution. Regarding the issue of migration, there are many types of migration, and that's not beyond the scope of what I will talk today. Forced migration that Dr. Manuel and I wrote about it, the brief policy, and also migration can be as part of natural disasters, ethnic cleansing, and many others. Legal migration, at times it can produce illegal migration if they break the contracts and things, while they are in the receiving country. Definitely seasonal migration, that's the case in the United States. Now, dealing with migrants and migration.
3 more minutes, please, Fahad, Dr. Fahad. 3 more minutes.
Okay, in a capsule, what I have thought of deriving from our policy for forced migration, I thought other policies that should be developed to take care of the irregular migration should start by education the individual within the countries. Within the state, various government agencies should start by educating the individual member of their societies. And then regionally, there must be some kind of arrangement within the same region that later can go and spread to other regions, which will take us to the internationally. So within different regions, working closely with other countries to fight the pandemic, coordinating the flux of migrants to and from countries. Can you go to the last one, please? These are the recommendations. I have some recommendation. Maybe I can go to the recommendation, please. This will...
Just share with us what you think is most concrete now, also to address to the G20 leaders.
We live in a very dangerous time. The G20 for this year or next year's should develop concrete multilateral approaches between different countries. To try to avoid protectionism. We have to come to an understanding that we share the same destiny as humans. And as such, there is no room for individual state actors to behave alone. It should be a collective effort based and rely on international organizations and the international community. I might have other ideas that I didn't have a chance to. I thought it's 10 minutes, so the recommendation.
You will have the chance. You will have the chance. We have a couple of minutes left for our discussion among the panelists. Okay. It's okay for you? Because I really would like to come back. In particular, you answered the question: what do we really need? What should the G20 do? You said multilateral approaches. I would actually like to go back. Thank you very much, Dr. Fahad. By the way, I have 2 points to make good use of the time which is left. First of all, to the audience, of course, you're welcome to answer to pose questions in the chat, and would be nice for me to coordinate it more easily if Mohammed or Her Royal Highness, somebody could send it to my mobile phone, and we will try to get 1 or 2 or even more of the questions from the audience to our.
Dear Astrid, what did you like me to send?
No, if you could send it to me, because it's a little bit difficult. This is now a technical matter. At the same time, to moderate and to get my esteemed panelists into a good discussion, and to look through the to the chat. Are there interesting questions? Yeah,
we'll do that.
Thank you very much. Sorry for this technical remark. So I would really like to underline what has been said before, and I think again, Paulo Magri had said there are more answers, more questions than answers. And I was just wondering, I mean, our topic is, can we reshape the future? And we are wonderful in analyzing, and we are asking for new instruments and new governance frameworks. So given, I asked you this before, what is wrong with our international regime on migration and forcibly displaced people? Why are we not progressing? And I really, I mean, I know that you have been around and you have worked so much on it. And why are we, in particular in the G20, and now with overshadowed by the pandemic, why are we not using this regime, global compacts, the UN organization, IOM, etc.? So maybe your wise comments on that we leave our panel with some positive outlook. Thank you, Güven.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the problem is that we are overwhelmed now by the development of this problem. And maybe we are now with COVID-19 doubly overwhelmed by this situation, because since the Second World War, we didn't have this much forcibly displaced person around the world. This is the first time that this is happening. So there are so many things that are happening in the South that needs to be addressed. There is the need for more public investments. No money is going there. There are so many needs on the one hand, but now with COVID-19, I think the problem is spreading, let me say. As I have noted, many of those migrants, about 86% of them are already in some developing countries. More or less, they are trying to organize their lives there. But now with COVID-19, we are seeing another factor that's disrupting that integration process too at the same time. So I think that's why the organizational structures that we have are somewhat outmoded to deal with this new situation. Now what we need is, as Dr. Fahad has also mentioned too, we know that it's a local impact, but there is the need for global burden sharing now at this stage, because we are doubly overwhelmed by this situation, but we don't have any mechanisms to deal with this issue of global burden sharing. There are under UN, global compacts for everything, but what we need, I think, we need to strengthen the institutions that we already have now in dealing with this situation. For example, in dealing with the health response, World Health Organization needs to be strengthened. In dealing with the economic impact, jump-starting the growth, etc., the World Bank, the IMF needs to be kind of strengthened. They need more funds. IMF definitely need more funds in dealing with the debt situation that may also make the situation, let me say, more grave than what we have at the moment. So I think we are now, as I said, doubly overwhelmed by this situation. And regarding COVID-19, we haven't been prepared to anything like this. And let me underline what I said earlier too. We are also not prepared to deal with the situation of, how we are going to get out of this process, how we are in an orderly fashion, how we are going to get out of this mess. We also don't know that too. That's why I think there is the need for more multilateralism, more cooperation, and we need to strengthen the mechanisms that we already have, as far as I see.
Okay, thank you, Güven. If I got this right, you're also talking with, migration is has become a sort of a cross-cutting issue. To integrate the migration topic into the different work streams and international mechanisms we have. Because as you said, the health, we cannot create a migration health instrument, not needed, but take it into the global health response, and same for education and what have you. Okay, thank you very much. Maybe Amal, also related to what I just asked, to the African migration, not so much the internal, although I personally believe in particular the development cooperation has to very much look into the internal migration in Africa, because you said this is 80% and we will have climate migrants and climate refugees around the corner. But this is too much for today. Again, we won't be overwhelmed with topics. Just what do you think the already existing instruments could help for the challenges you have described? Yeah, please.
I think that globally the appetite for a global order on migration is not very present among all stakeholders. And when we look at the global compact on migration and the other one on refugees, and Morocco was co-hosting with Germany the event, not all countries were signatory of the compact. And if we look at African countries, most of them actually have done the effort to sign the compact. But when some destination countries, and at the top of them, for example, the United States and other countries, were either absent from the compact or did not want to sign the compact, then we understand that there is no common ground between the sending countries and the destination countries on the question of how to manage migration and mobility. And I think the problematic part of it is that, unfortunately, migration has been linked with so many discourses on
used almost exclusively to describe romantic relationships. But that night, as I listened to the monk talk about his experience, I fell in love.
Sorry, who is talking? Could you please identify yourself? I want to keep the audience. So is this Dr. Fahad? Because I cannot see your face, you should unmute the video. Ah, thank you very much. Thanks. Okay. Okay, take over, Dr. Fahad.
I wasn't talking earlier. Okay. Okay, you hear me then? Okay.
Yes, we do. Please.
Okay. First, I like to apologize. I'm new on this technology, and I have my set of notes directly, but then I found the whole thing is I have no control of it. Anyway, I might just revisit some of the points regarding the possible multilateralism between the sending and receiving countries. As we know, and from that there are sending countries of labor migrants. Very often when they arrive in the host countries, they even the legal one, I mean, we're talking about the legal workers, they have contract. and sometimes they go break the contract and become illegal. Now, what I am suggesting, if it would be better, the best for everybody, if there must be some kind of treaties that deals with the unintended consequences of the labor movement from the sending to the host countries, to find and involve both the sending and receiving countries' bureaucrats. There is a problem in bureaucracy within the host and the sending countries regarding how to come up with good procedure and recommendations that save the dignity and safety of the labor once they travel to the other country. There is also a need for the diplomatic missions in the receiving countries to work closely with the host country's bureaucratic system, okay, to find solutions to solve arising issues, like in the case of the pandemic in Saudi Arabia and everywhere. There must be agreement to face such disasters ahead of time. And of course, it can be between two countries in the beginning, but I hope this would become a guiding point for a multi-lateral situation where every sending and receiving countries should be involved in it.
Okay, thank you. Time is almost up, but I would like, this is to Mohammed. Do you see anybody from the audience who would like to intervene with a question?
There are questions. Astrid, this is Güven.
Huh? Sorry. Güven, you want to comment? Because I would like to make a last round anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm seeing I saw the questions over there. That's why.
Please go ahead, read them out and comment.
Okay. I saw a question about whether more trade and investment, a kind of a trade and investment agreement with the EU may help in helping the situation. You know, this was our discussion in the, let's say, in the past, whether some kind of trade agreements, some preferential trade agreements with the refugee hosting countries, destination countries, the developing countries may help for the integration, job of the migrants and job creation for them. But I think we are not there at this moment because this crisis is everywhere. This, you know, the growth problem is everywhere, job creation problem is everywhere. So I think this is the time for more on trying to understand and act together, I think, with what the EU and the developed countries are trying to do in order to jumpstart growth. You know, more focused public investment programs and other things looks to be more important at this stage. So that's what we also in the developing world need to do in order to cope with this situation. But then, of course, you come to the situation where you have highly indebted countries, you have highly indebted companies. So that's why all those debt-related issues and you know, the participation of the international organizations into the solution map, let me say, is going to become more important. So in the past, when everything is okay, when we didn't have the COVID-19, when there is job creation, when growth in the developed countries, it's much easier to focus on trade and investment agreements. But now I think we are in a new situation. And for the years to come, we need a different sort of a leadership issue that we need to deal with to jumpstart the growth process all around the globe at the same time. Then I see questions about governance problems, whether you know, multilaterally something could be done for the governance issues in different countries. Let me put it this way. Let me put it this way. First of all, for example, this migration issue is a very local issue. It's a developing country problem, but also it's an urban problem at the same time. In the hosting developing countries too, it's an urban problem. So as far as we see in Turkey, local leadership is of utmost importance. Local leadership at the level of municipalities, local leadership at the level of chambers of commerce and industry, whether they are helping the migrant companies to deal with the issue. So I think what is needed is, especially in a country like Turkey, where it is a very centralized unitary state, let me say, we need a kind of an urban governance reform, first of all, for the local stakeholders to have more saying in the decision-making process. I think that's an important issue. Then comes the more general governance, global governance problems.
Yeah, thank you. Given we are a little bit short on time now, if I could summarize your intervention: a global burden sharing, but local collective action. So if we take this with us, Amal, a very last sentence or two. What is your expectation? When would you be happy after the Leaders Summit, and when you read the summit declaration about a line on migration and the commitment of the G20? And this question also goes to Dr. Fahad, but please only 2 sentences, otherwise Mohammed will kick us out of the system. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah.
Amal first, but really very short.
Yeah, of course. I'll be really glad to see much of consideration to real changes, structural changes in favor of social policies and in favor of decent job creation.
Thank you. Dr. Fahad, one last word from your side. What's your expectation?
I have a great hopes in the future regarding the undocumented migrants in the Gulf and other areas where they're born in the country without documents to be allowed the nationality of the state. I think this effort started in UAE, and I hope Saudi Arabia will take it in consideration and it's spread otherwise.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, my disciplined panelists. What great moderating this discussion. And I believe there's a lot to do for the Italian presidency, and I very much appreciate, Paolo Magri, that you will continue with the task force on migration, and hopefully we will be more in action next year. Thank you very much. I give it back to Her Royal Highness and Mohammed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Astrid. That was a great panel discussion. I would like to thank all the participants, all the authors, their wonderful thoughts. I think it was a very lively discussion, and I think we all have great food for thought and great innovative ideas of looking at what's going to happen forward. Thank you so much. I'm going to thank Mohammed Ramezan, who has been a great support all through the process, and he is our coordinator. Invaluable contributions, and he will proceed to present the second panel. Thank you.
Thank you again for your wonderful moderation, dear Astrid, and also to the comments and the presentation of our presenters in our first panel. Now, I would like to move on to our next panel. I would like to invite Task Force Co-Chair Dr. Al-Anud Al-Sharikh, Director of Ibtikar Strategic Consultancy, and also the moderator of this panel. The floor is yours, Dr. Al-Anud.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for this introduction. I'm very excited to be moderating this most important panel on the future of young societies and the impact of the new digital platforms on the most vulnerable segments, migrants, women, and children. I think that during this particular crisis, it has become very clear that we are all a lot more vulnerable than we had expected to be. And so it has created a lot more, I think, impetus for action. And we have all become increasingly reliant on virtual tools and new digital technologies. So these policy briefs that will be presented here really shed a light on the nexus between the needs of those most vulnerable societies and the new applications online. I'd like to start with Pichaya Sirivanabut, and she will be speaking on capacity building and as she sees it in her policy brief through fiscal sustainability. And her field is in capacity building and training as an economist at the Asian Development Bank Institute. The floor is yours, Pichaya.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ano. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So today's topic that I'm just going to talk about is just refine a little bit from our policy brief, just to be in line with the topic of the session today. So what I'm going to talk about.
I think there is a technical issue. We cannot see and hear Pichaya talking.
And the social cohesion is on next slide, please. Is on. Thank you. It's on the fiscal sustainability and social cohesion in the face of demographic change. And then we have the co-authors from 3 different organizations, ADBI, AEI, and also CAPSAR. And then this policy brief, the next is to answer 2 main challenges that you can see here, plus the additional challenge that just emerged recently within the, in this year. So the first one is fiscal sustainability. We're trying just to solve the problem of the negative impact of the policy impact of population aging on the fiscal sustainability. Basically, how to prepare the G20 economy in the face of rapid demographic change. And the second challenge is just to improve the social cohesion and how to promote the social cohesion at different phases of demographic transition. Last but not least, the recently emerged one for this year is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the fiscal deficit, which we can see the very severe impact on that, as well as it's also caused the exclusion of vulnerable groups like elderly, female, also migrants, as well as the poor people from the policy responses. So what the policy proposal that we are actually proposed, just to recap for all of you, can I have a next slide, please? Is including to 4 different proposals. What we highlight is the improved productivity that we're trying just to enhance the labor participation from the vulnerable group, the female, and also elderly, as well as the migrant. So we include this in just to trying just to have longer retirement age, as well as the flexible and efficient migration policy. The next one is to invest in education, trying to improve the productivity, not just the working population, but also from the future generation that prepare for the job market in the future. And then when it comes to the fiscal sustainability, we propose strengthen fiscal framework, both from revenue side and also from the expenditure side. Last but not least, is to ensure the inclusion in the society by recommended the comprehensive reform of the public pension, social security, and healthcare scheme. So let us focus the presentation today on the preparing young society for demographic change. The next slide, please. The first one is the investment in education. So if you see here in the diagram, can you click one more time? Thank you very much. Basically, it just try to improve the quality of the labor force and also to make the labor productivity higher. There's three pillars here that you see. The first one is to invest in the skill for future generation. Basically, this crucial skill that we highlight is just skills that required to be successful in the future market, which include critical thinking, emotional intelligence, as well as flexibility that also includes adaptability. This is more like a soft skill that required in the future market. And the adaptability and flexibility, like we can see this day, is very important when it comes to external shock, particularly as come from the COVID-19 and also from the technology. The next one is a skill for increased productivity. So this one is to invest in formal and technical education that would go to entrepreneurship, innovation, and technology R&D investment. This kind of thing would require to help the key factor for the job creation. The next one is when we're talking about future generation, we cannot ignore the working age or working population, as well as the one that already in the labor market. So just to ensure that there would be productivity increase, we highlight the lifelong education to equip them with the new knowledge in digitalization of economy and society, and this to offer them to have an ability to overcome barrier to the productivity that caused by innovation and rapid technology changes. When we another policy recommendation that I'd like to help prepare young society is to plan for fiscal balance. As we know that we're going entering the demographic change and all the society across G20, we have to experience these changes. The most important thing is just to try to minimize the fiscal deficit, or at least try to balance it a little bit, not just to go to the deep deficit. The three pillars here is just to focus first the revenue increase. Like for the revenue element, we have seen that in developing countries, particularly young society, they rely the government rely their revenue on the income tax. So what we propose is a shift in the tax mix. So don't just rely solely on the income tax, but also just have a mix of consumption tax or environment tax, carbon tax, particularly in a country like Saudi Arabia, or also excise tax. Those kind of luxury tax would help to increase the revenue. Another way to do is to improve the tax administration. So what we can do is to make it through the digital platform and improve it to the new technology. One-stop service, the one-stop service could just also help to improve the tax administration and probably make it easier for taxpayers just to go pay tax and able to help improve the tax collection. For the government expenditure, the comprehensive review is also recommended. Anything that's not necessary in terms of subsidy should be reviewed and maybe have a cut from the fiscal expenditure. This is just to ensure that all the government expenditure that we put into the society will help to improve the productivity as well as the social inclusion. The fiscal space needs to be prepared for the impact of population aging. As we know, it may be anytime soon, but still the preparation always important just to be considered. Last but not least, the build up of the fiscal, financial safety net as well as the social safety net has to be something that all the young society need to start thinking about and discuss about, particularly the one in the G20 economy. This is just to help them boost up the inclusion, social inclusion, and just to not leave everyone, no one get left behind. So the inclusive social protection program, as well as the comprehensive reform of the public pension and social security scheme, will help prepare the young society for the upcoming population aging. Also, just to prepare them for any possible external shock like COVID-19 pandemic. So I just stop here and we'll be happy just to take a question later on. Thank you very much. I hand the floor back to Dr. Arano.
Thank you for that, Pachaya. That was very comprehensive and detailed. In the interest of time, I think we're gonna move right on to our next speaker, Charles Martin Shields. He's a senior researcher at the German Development Institute, and he's going to talk to us about digitalization in the lives of displaced people, perspectives on COVID-19.
Thank you for the introduction. I can tie in some COVID-19 points. I'll just be covering the points from the policy brief I worked on primarily. A lot of this was drawing on research from the past few years we've been doing on digitalization in the lives of forcibly displaced people and what that means for improving services, especially humanitarian services, and the work that development agencies put into displacement response. If you go to the next slide, please. So the overall challenge we took on in the work was looking at digital inclusion for the displaced, how to empower displaced people to understand what tools were available, and then also what kind of skills were needed, what kind of messaging was needed, so that displaced populations could take advantage of the tools that were provided to them by agencies like UNHCR. And a lot of this was driven by the idea that more digital inclusion has the capacity and potential to increase displaced people's self-reliance, which ties into a lot of the kind of development humanitarian nexus agenda and the Global Compact for Refugees. But from the perspective of displaced people themselves, who we interviewed and did surveys with, there were some gaps that needed to be bridged, one of which was costs. Another was communication, just communicating about what tools are available that are being developed by development agencies, increasing institutional knowledge of existing digital behavior among displaced people, and kind of globalizing privacy standards in digital tools that are going to be used for identification and sensitive records tracking and management. Next slide. So I'll just run through these. I'll offer the problem and the solutions that were recommended. The first one was cost and affordability. Something that surprised us when we were doing our work was that people talked about how data bundles were often too expensive to use online tools created by humanitarian agencies or development cooperation agencies. This was a surprise to us because we saw people using WhatsApp. We saw people using Facebook on their smartphones, but they had adapted very specific ways to use very little data to maximize the value they got out of the costs. One thing that agencies are kind of shy about doing is partnering with telecoms to subsidize the cost of airtime. Something we would argue in the work we were doing is that this could actually pay off in the initial stages of settling into a new place, just to ease the burden of arrival for many people, and that would bring them in to digital solutions. Next slide. The second thing, and this was also kind of a surprise to us, was issues of communication and outreach. A lot of really cool tools, apps, things that are available and are being built by UN agencies and development cooperation agencies. But when we sat and talked with the displaced people in Colombia, Kenya, and Malaysia, a theme that we picked up on in the data collection was a lot of people would say, oh, I didn't know about that tool. They had a very strong focus on something like WhatsApp, which had meaning in their daily life. And a lot of refugees had found really creative ways to use a commercial tool like WhatsApp. But trying to bring them on board to something like an app developed by UNHCR required a lot more messaging and thinking about things like advertising. And then knowledge of digital behavior. This is more on the institutional side. In many cases, you don't need to build a new tool or app, because as I just said, a lot of these communities have found creative ways to use existing tools, but it requires basic research, and humanitarian organizations aren't research organizations. So supporting long-term basic research and working with researchers to make sure that the results feed in to policy frameworks, I think is a really key aspect of learning in depth about the displaced communities they're working with. In the fourth challenge, next slide. I think this ties in quite a bit to COVID. When I talked in June about COVID-19 and displacement and digitalization, I would say this is the area where there's the most tie-in. This is privacy standards. one of the key issues is privacy standards and data protection rules vary a lot in both the digital humanitarian space, which agencies are doing what has an effect on what data privacy and management rules are in place, but also the country you're operating in, because regulations are different from country to country. To standardize this, we argue that this kind of falls on the donor side in terms of who you give contracts to and the frameworks of the contracts. So making sure that there's long-term funding, not just 1 to 2 years, which a lot of humanitarian agencies are stuck working with, but like 5 to 10 years of funding for maintenance and data security. A lot of times the breakdowns that happen in privacy and data protection are just because a system doesn't get maintained, it gets set up and not maintained. And then finding data hosting solutions where there are the strongest privacy regulations, taking advantage of cloud services. This is something that can be built into contracts in terms of reference by donors. And in doing so, I think this can kind of globalize and standardize operations for the agencies and organizations that receive the money. If they can start to predict that they need to know that they can hire for a long-term contract the maintenance capacity, then in that way they're going to be able to adapt to a more standardized environment that deals with privacy standards. And I think when we start talking about especially COVID and public health, and when you see the risks that refugees face in terms of the risk is xenophobia, the risk of registering and having a population say, ooh, you're a refugee, you shouldn't be here, and you have COVID, and you're a risk to us. How you handle data as an organization and digital data goes a long way toward not only protecting refugees and displaced people, but building trust in the host communities. And I think this is where privacy standards really come in. With that, that's kind of just the quick overview. I will hand it back. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Charles. This issue of privacy, especially during COVID, and including not just refugees, but migrant communities as a whole, in a way that's different from nationals within countries. I think it's just going to get more complicated as different vaccines come up and countries need to prioritize. So thank you for shedding light on some of the online problems that we're going to face with that. We're going to move on to Sarah Lichtenberg-Kasten, who is a research fellow at the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center. Sarah, the floor is yours if you'd like to speak about your policy brief. Are we having a technical issue?
Can we move on to the next panelist while we sort the technical issues with Sarah?
Sure. I'll move on to Amani Al-Kufat, who is the chairman of pediatric hematology and oncology at the King Faisal Specialist Hospital and Research Center. Amani, are you ready to join us? Fantastic.
Doctor, my name is Fakharuddin Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Dr. Amani, who is the lead author, and myself, I would like to express my deepest gratitude for this opportunity, and I would like to thank the task force, especially Her Royal Highness Dr. Maha Al Saud, for the encouragement and the opportunity itself. I would also like to thank the co-chairs, the reviewers, and also the coordinator. Dr. Amani is unable to join because of some technical glitch with her mic, but she's able to listen into the conversation and the presentation. I would like to present today the proposals that we put forward by means of our policy brief titled Offering Virtual Consultative Services to Improve Lives of Refugees Awaiting Resettlement at Camps. We're all aware of the challenges. We're all aware of the challenges that this vulnerable group of individuals, the migrants, experience on their day-to-day life, in the refugee camps, awaiting their resettlement or integration. While they do that, while they're waiting for the resettlement, it may vary from a few years to a lifetime, making this their permanent stay for longer than they had anticipated. And with migrant crisis taking a center stage at the G20 discussions, I think this gives us a unique opportunity to at least propose and come up with committed collaborative efforts from the global leaders to ease the circumstances at the camps, especially for the youth and the children, with respect to their safety, security, and most importantly, the healthcare and educational and vocational opportunities, or training, if you want. Can you please move to the next slide? As we all try and cope with the COVID-19 pandemic, this has introduced a new set of challenges to this vulnerable group of individuals, which is the migrants at the refugee camps, because now any physical or in-person efforts aimed towards the resettlement has halted or delayed indefinitely. And as we personally in our daily life, where every sector of life has ceased to exist in a physical sense, and we adapt to the virtual community and the services are able to be provided to us, this gives, in my opinion, in our opinion, when we were discussing this policy brief and the discussions that between us and the reviewers we had, we wanted to come up with some innovative outreach concepts that could be explored with reference to the current adaptability towards these virtual platforms that we are currently using. So why we cannot materialize on these outreach concepts virtually, that is, in terms of improving the access to the services during the refugee resettlement or integration process. Next slide, please. So what we propose by means of our policy brief is a virtual consultative services into the forced displacement context that takes an integrated approach to a collaborative framework of existing resources and partnerships. And then that's why I was saying that this was such an learning experience for us, because one of the first comments that was from the reviewer in the initial draft of our policy brief was, as we all are aware, the internet connectivity is suboptimal, if not non-existent, in most of these resettlement scenarios or the camps. So we propose here some of the proposals or some of the suggestions that we can work on to improve connectivity services at refugee camps, how we can explore, when I say we, I mean the G20 members, explore on building partnerships towards facilitating or extending virtual platforms to the refugee settlements. Next slide, please. Now, so what we propose by means of this policy brief to the G20 members is to promote and raise awareness of community network technologies, that is basically low-cost Wi-Fi routers or Wi-Fi hotspots or mobile networks within this resettlement context, which is basically at the camps. And we believe that the G20 members has the leverage towards the telecommunication and tech companies to incentivize or subsidize through reducing licensing burdens to facilitate or encourage support for the community networks, thereby ensuring the spectrum access that is required to be able to facilitate a virtual platform that is able to enable the proposed services that we have in this policy brief. Next slide, please. The building, as we know, the member states of the G20 constitutes to about 80% of the world's GDP. Now, we believe that this gives a unique standing to the G20 members in terms of involving various development actors, such as the UN agencies, the civil society, or for that matter, any organization that is engaged in refugee-led development projects. So this gives a unique edge to the G20 members. And I would like to cite one example here where the funding in terms of education or the financial support could be ascertained. That is the Global Partnership for Education. Education Cannot Wait, and the World Bank, which has been committed to working together to improve the support and the technical assistance in terms of finances or any other to deliver the education to the refugees and the host communities. And the most important is to build the technological partnership. In the interest of time, I will not go into the various examples that we had provided in the policy brief, but one of them is the Gates Foundation with several other companies that they had provided during the Kosovo crisis. And they can do that. The G20 members has the unique edge to do that by incentivizing state-owned contracts or subsidies. So what we propose is extending a platform to the refugee settlements, NGOs, be it the UN agencies or whoever, a platform by the G20, which is available, and the refugee settlements can register, and through a coordinator, we will be able to provide the following services. One service could be requested, or all of them could be requested. That is the legal counseling services, which will be, of course, in the native language, psychosocial counseling, telehealth services, educational and vocational training. And this will also, and by these portal or by these services, we can also look for volunteers. And from my personal anecdote, my wife is a teacher. And when I talked about this, when I was writing the policy brief, she and her colleagues were just so excited. And they're like, I'm sure if we are getting this excited toward this noble cause in terms of education, pretty much every profession would be excited and would be able to contribute in their own way. And I believe every small contribution matters at this point. And by this, I would stop here, and I apologize for any background noise if you heard, because I'm currently in a place where there's a lot of floods going on. There's a lot of rain. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fakharuddin. That was wonderful, although I would have to say that not all of us find the online education solutions to be so delightful. Some of us are particularly challenged by them, especially those with small children. Sarah, I hope that your issue has been resolved and you can join us now. If you can unmute, please, and I'll reintroduce you. Sarah Lechtenberg-Kasten, Research Fellow, King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center. Please speak to us about your policy brief.
Thank you so much, and thanks to the team for jumping in and helping with the technology at the last second. We have great people at CAPSARC, so thanks to everyone for that support. Thanks so very much for the opportunity to speak with everyone today. I'd like to thank the whole T20 team for having the opportunity to be a part of this amazing process. Additionally, I'd like to thank my co-writers, Dr. Tim Fraser at Georgetown University in Washington, DC, and Sarah Wehada, legal advisor at Princess Noor University here in Riyadh. So the inspiration for this paper came from a conversation about a year ago with Dr. Fraser, and we were talking about the Resilient Cities project at CAPSARC, but we got off on a bit of a tangent and began discussing risk and resiliency projects as they relate to refugees. So we wanted to take a short amount of time and write this paper on the need to address additional and expanded education opportunities for young migrant, refugee, and internally displaced children. So at the beginning of the presentation, we heard the keynote from Dr. Paolo Magri about how the large proportion of a lot of refugees are young people. And the UN High Commission for Refugees has those similar data points, and these are pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, approximately 91% of primary age children around the world were in school, but only 63% of refugee kids are able to access education in a classroom. Second data point, 84% of high school kids around the globe are in the classroom, but only 63% of high school students that are refugees are able to access education. And finally, at university or colleges, we call it in the US, less than 1% of refugee kids are able to access higher education. So those are not good numbers, and it's a daunting problem, but I do have some good news today. The international organizations like the UN and also the Interagency Network on Education and Emergencies have worked tirelessly on this topic, and they've already created the actionable policy options. but it's just a matter now of leveraging the technology to make this happen. So this is, as we would call in policy circles, this action is ripe for the international community to have it at the forefront. So a lot of the discussion in the pre-COVID days was that distance learning or hybrid learning was just not practical for these migrant, internally displaced and refugee communities. But we would offer up, but that perhaps the only decent part of the pandemic is that we have learned that distance learning and technology solutions can be a best alternative to in-class solutions. So with everything going on in the world, it's very tempting to leave education for migrant, refugee, and internally displaced youth at the bottom of the priorities. But I would encourage us to keep that on the forefront for policy approaches in the next year. So I would like to leave the discussion with 2 questions. And these are what if questions. The first one is really, what if we were to be able to create better linkages between stakeholders? At the current time, we have educators working on one side, technology teams working on another, host nation officials on others, just struggling to keep up with the day-to-day, and finally, donor agencies that are somewhat siloed in a different area of the world. What we need to see in 2021 is a catalyst, a sort of unity of effort on this topic to set us into the next space. So the second question that I'd really like to leave you with is, we just heard from Charles Martin about people talking about the costs, the burden and the financial cost of the technology solutions. But what we would like to do is kind of shift the discussion just a bit. And so I would pose the question on education access and doing a cost benefit analysis. So I'd like to flip the question and say, what is that cost of inaction? When we don't have access to education, we say, how much is it going to cost to fund this technology? But what I would say is, what is the long-term cost of not funding, of not taking action? So that's the real challenge that we would put forth, that, it's a difficult thing to take on, but it's a much more difficult thing to look at those vast populations that will not be able to be productive members of society. So as we look to 2021 and under the leadership of the Italian group under the T20, we look to hoping that this will be a continued issue, and we'll be able to look back in hindsight that we had a great deal of success under their leadership and also the opportunity to contribute to this team. So thanks everyone very much. And thanks again to CapsArt for the opportunity to work on this.
Thank you, Sarah. That was very interesting and fair warning, I think, to get a move on, to try to integrate policies as applicable to reality. I'm going to run with the first question that you posed, because we've been asked this question also in the chat. So you spoke about unity, and one of the questions was about whether all the countries under T20 100% support the scheme policy. And I would also link that with a question to you, Pachaya. Your policy brief looked at fiscal sustainability, but we know that the new realities and the economic hit that the globe has been going through now during this crisis that doesn't seem to be slowing down, unfortunately. How much of that will affect the question of economic sustainability, maybe in the short term and then in the long term, if you would venture an idea?
Thank you, Dr. Alano, for the question. So I think, as we all know, the government debt is actually skyrocketing for this year, just because of the pandemic and the impact of it from the lockdown and the travel restriction. So we cannot deny that this year is going to be, we're going to see a lot of negative figure everywhere around the world. And when it comes up to fiscal sustainability. That's the most challenging things that we don't even at the moment. It just could even out of the question for us just to try to sustain the fiscal balance for this year. What we're doing is just we looking for the more like the as I mentioned in one of the recommendation in my presentation, this financial and social safety net is something that we really need to come up with for this particular unprecedented situation. That's the preparation that I think other countries, not just the G20s, but also other economy, both in Asia, Europe, and also US, really needed to help out. The help from international organization, IMF, OECD, or World Bank, and also ADB itself. We offer so much financial support, funding grants for as a policy response because of just to help at least alleviate this sort of impact from the pandemic. So to answer your question, the sustainability fiscal sustainability, we need to prepare for our fiscal space. As I say, it's just not because of the demographic change, but it's also just to prepare ourselves for something that happened as an external shock that no one think. So that would just be my first response. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chaya. If I can then, sort of pose this question to you, but a little differently, Charles. How do we incentivize the countries that are involved to move forth with these digitalization solutions while keeping in mind the privacy concerns that you brought up?
I think one way to incentivize the investment from a development cooperation perspective in kind of data protection and maintenance costs, because they are costs, and I know that when a donor adds money to a request, there are political issues that come with negotiating that. One way to deal with it, as I said, is thinking about where you're hosting data, and if data is hosted in countries where the regulations and the infrastructure are already pre-existing, and the capacity to protect data is already there within the commercial space. Taking advantage of cloud services is a good way to minimize costs over time. And if you're a European donor, to play a key role in the data management process, because some of the better places to host data are in the EU. UNHCR hosts some of their data in Belgium, for example. So I think in a way, kind of saying to the donors, come and be a part of this, and use the infrastructure you've built up for your citizens and expand that capacity to those in need as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm assuming that Dr. Amani still has microphone issues, so I'm gonna give this question to Mohammed. When we're thinking about what you brought up in your policy brief in terms of specifically health services, how can we guarantee that the quality remains the same to this vulnerable population that we want to service?
Thank you so much for the question, Doctor. I can speak based on our experience with the patients. Me and Dr. Amani work in the pediatric hematology oncology, and we have a lot of patients who are on a routine protocol, and they come for the treatment and then they go home. When the COVID-19 struck, we were not sure how to provide the services in terms of the follow-ups to this group of patients who are also at high risk of coming to the hospitals. Our experience, we were able to maintain the quality in terms of the care that we were supposed to provide. And from the patient's perspective, they actually liked being seen virtually rather than coming on, let's say, if they had a follow-up in a month's time for the lab work or whatever is their reason for coming. But having said that, this required even labs at an outreach facility to be able to draw the labs, and we could actually review them. Now, when we wrote the policy brief, keeping in mind this vulnerable group of individuals, we know for sure they do not have the basic healthcare that they need, right? So they don't have it. We are talking about the care, and we are extending the services to their home, even the labs. But these individuals, they don't even have that. So when we wrote up the policy and we gave an example of an Australian experience in terms of telehealth, what they did is within their structure of healthcare, they had a Medicare item which drops in the charges for the telehealth services for these individuals being seen at the hospital, at the camps. And that is a model that we want to propose to the G20 members, that within there, for example, I'm just going to give the example of NHS, for example, or because we have the European migrant crisis. So the healthcare sectors, the healthcare workers within themselves, they need to have these kind of Medicaid items or the charges to be dropped, which facilitate the healthcare services to these individuals. That's the idea we had in our mind. Yeah, I don't know if I answered or tried to touch. I know it's a very complex, but this is closest to us, me and Dr. Amani both. I wish she could speak because she, as a consultant, I'm a lead research associate, but she as a consultant, she's at the front line with the patients, and the experiences that she's been sharing with us are just mind-blowing. The families who comes from the very far, the cities of the Saudi Arabia, they said, we actually like this. And this actually saved a lot of money even to the government, because I'm talking about Saudi Arabia in the context of Saudi, the way the healthcare is set up, even the flight in and out, we could save that cost. And while providing, and then the outreach labs were functional to the level that we can give the quality of care that we were supposed to give in person when they were at the hospital.
Well, thank you for that explanation, Mohammed. That's certainly reassuring. Sarah, we're going to close out the comments with a question to you. And this is a question that came up also in the chat from our participants. It's about if we can find educational solutions to reach the youth, would that, do you think, translate into better job opportunities for them in the home countries or hosting countries where they are?
So I'll jump back just a minute. One of the best practices is really investing in the host nation, because the more that you can invest in the host nation schools, like where the newcomers are coming, then everyone benefits. So that there's not this divide between newcomer and longtime residents. So that's best practice number one. The second practice is not all education has to be that everyone's going to university, but it's opening up those opportunities to find meaningful training and technical programs so that you can have work, and work equals dignity. So it's what we have really written education in the broader sense, not just in a more narrow kind of view that, that everyone should go to university. That's not the case. And we deal with that a little bit in the paper. But overarchingly, Italy has had some tremendous successes partnering with host nation officials, host education systems, and international donors. So it's really exciting to see that they will be supporting the T20 process next year.
Well, thank you, giving us a lot to think about, and I hope that these policy briefs that you've worked so diligently on will provide avenues for assimilation, and as Sarah said, vocational training and looking at alternatives that are realistic to guarantee a life of dignity for youth and And I turn the discussion back to Dr. Naha and Mohammed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Anoud. It was a pleasure to see the whole panel discussing a very interesting topic, and we have great expectations for the policy briefs and the recommendations. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for the great effort and the contribution. Thank you so much.
Also, thanks should go back to your Royal Highness. Now we're going to move to another interesting part of this webinar. It is actually the time for the art presentation. For this event, art is seen as the universal language transcending barriers of language, time, and T20 uses the art to communicate its theme, priorities, and also recommendation to everyone else. For this part, I would like to invite Majid Al-Mfarreh. Majid is a Saudi fine artist born in Riyadh in 1977. He was he has a BA in business administration. Majid also curves his artistic experience spontaneously and abstractly from his childhood memories. His visual vocabulary revives the details of a market life and the pulse of diversity in colors and values and nostalgia, tradition. Majid, the floor is yours, and I would like to note to everyone that English and Arabic translation available. You may select the audio language by clicking the interpretation tab at the bottom of the screen in your platform. Majid, the floor is yours.
طفلة السجاد هو يعني يرمز إلى المعاناة حول العالم، سواء المهاجرين أو اللاجئين، وسواء يعني معاناتهم الاقتصادية أو الاجتماعية أو التعليمية أو عدم اندماجهم مع المجتمع الآخر. الطفل رمزية، صورة رمزية، بخلفه هذا السجاد تكوين معين، ألوان معينة تخدم الفكرة أكثر، سجاد محتري، وكأنه هذا الطفل ينسج أحلامه، ينسج أفكاره، وحتى لو كان على سجاد محتري، حتى لو كان أفكار قديمة، ولكنه لا زال يحلم بإذن الله أن أحلامه تتحقق وحلمنا جميعا يتحقق. اليوم الفن السعودي يعيش في أجمل حالاته. لقينا فعلا هذا الاحتواء من المملكة. كان عندي حلم وأنا قاتل علشانه، أني دائما أطور من نفسي، أطور من أدواتي، وأني أحاول أني أسخر هذه الأدوات أو أسخر هذا الفن بما يخدمني أنا أكثر، بما يفيدني، يفيد المجتمع، يفيد وطني. قدر الإمكان أنك تصف مصاف الدول الأخرى. الحمد لله عندنا شباب واعي، عندنا شباب مثقف يستغل إمكانياته، يستغل ثرواته، والحمد لله أنا اليوم يعني قطعت شوط بسيط وباقي لي شوط كثيرة إن شاء الله في القادم إن شاء الله.
هلو ماجد.
أهلين، مساء الخير. مساء الخير على الجميع. مساء الخير على الجميع.
يا هلا وسهلا، يا هلا وسهلا، يعطيك ألف عافية. صراحة مرة حلو. يا هلا فيك.
الله يعافيكم وشكرا. مساء الخير G20. بصراحة في البداية أشكر الجميع وأتشرف أن أكون ضمن هذا الحراك وهذا الحدث العالمي ضمن G20، ومشاركتي بلوحة اللي هي بنت السجاد التي تعبر عن حياة المهاجرين واللاجئين ومدى معاناتهم حول العالم. سواء اقتصاديا أو تعليميا أو اجتماعيا. حقيقة الفنان يتلمس حاجات الواقع ويتلمس الواقع بشكل أعمق. الفنان دائما أبسط مما نتوقع وأعمق مما نعتقد. بحقيقة الفنان له نظرة أحيانا تكون عميقة بأكثر من اللي حوله، بحكم أنه إنسان يعني دائما يبحث ويرصد كل شاردة واردة ويحاول أن يجسدها في عمله الفني. حاولت أني أنا أشارك همومهم وأشارك يعني اللاجئين همومهم وأشاركهم معاناتهم. بالحقيقة يعني هذا أقل واجب نحن نقوم فيه، هذا أقل شيء نحن نتحد مع أي شخص يعاني، أي شخص نقدم له العون. كلهم في تخصصه، فمن الواجب علي أني أحاول قدر الإمكان وقدر المستطاع أني أكون عضو فاعل، عضو يحاول قدر الإمكان أنه يعني يقدم يد العون للآخرين. زي ما قلت الفنان أبسط مما تتوقع وأعمق مما نعتقد. بصراحة طفلة السجاد لها هموم ولها معاني ولها رسائل. الطفلة صورة تعبيرية عن الحالة اللي يعيشها هؤلاء اللاجئين. يعني وكأن الطفل هذا بأفكاره وبحياته البسيطة التي يعيشها وينسج عالمه الخاص وينسج أفكاره ويتمنى أن يحقق هذه الأحلام. بصورة خلف هذا العمل، خلفية العمل، سجاد وكأنه بشكله مهتري. يعني أنا حاولت أني أعالجه معالجة بقدر الإمكان أنها تخدم الفكرة وتوصل المعنى أكثر، برغم هذا الانكسار أو برغم هذا البساطة وبرغم هذا المعاناة، إلا أنه لا زال يبحث ويتمنى أن يعيش في منطقة آمنة. حاولت أن أجسد ما حول العمل باللون الأبيض مما يعطي تفاؤل أو نافذة أمل لهذا الطفل للعالم الخارجي، مهما كان وصل من معاناة أو إحباط. لا زلنا احنا ننظر له كعالم خارجي بإشراقه، إن احنا نمد يد العون له. وزي ما قلت لكم أنه يكون كل شخص عن طريق تخصصه. الفنان يعبر بطريقته، والشاعر أيضا يعني يعبر بطريقته، والأديب والاقتصادي وهكذا. فحبيت أنه يكون يعني الموضوع مركز في هذا الصدد، وحبيت أنه أسلط وأوجه رسالة أن لا زلنا معكم وقلبا وقالبا، ولا زلنا يعني بكامل أدواتنا بكامل أفكارنا نعيش معكم هذا الهموم، نعيش معكم هذه الفكرة، وبإذن الله أن سوف نصل إلى منطقة آمنة بإذن الله.
شكرا ماجد. Thank you to everyone else who has been with us during this ongoing and active webinar. After we thanked Majid for his very interesting presentation of his piece of arts, now we should move to another part of this webinar. I would like to invite Dr. Zayed Aidat, the director of the Center for Strategic Studies at Jordan University. Dr. Aidat, the floor is yours. Your mic is still off, Dr. Ziad.
You did in a minute. Well, thank you very much. Just a minor corrections. My name is Zaid Riadat. What an honor and a pleasure to be part of such an outstanding event. The Task Force 9 within the T20 as part of the G20 meetings. We at the CSS are especially honored to co-host this event, and allow me all to, on behalf of myself and the center and everyone here at in Jordan, been working with us on this event, to express our thanks and gratitude to Her Royal Highness Dr. Maha and to Dr. Fahad and our partners in Saudi Arabia. I very much enjoyed the discussions and the panels today. And I've seen there is a shifting discourse on the issues of migration, which we highly and urgently need. In particular, this imbalances that governs the discourse on migration. So while the majority of migrants is from south to south and within the south, the intellectual and academic work and the research done is mostly produced from north. And this, as everyone can expect and predict, could cause a lot of problem understanding the issues at hand. The second issue concerning the migration and refugees at large, to my mind, is also the existing institutions and the legal framework, which appears to be out of date. Mostly were created for other reasons, for problems concerning certain continent, and have led over time to certain mindsets of how we perceive migrants, those the migrants and the refugee, and what to deal with them. Well, if to pick on a very immediate experience, the Syrian refugees dilemma that emerged since 2011, we can detect very easily that the containment kind of mentality has actually governed the north thinking of the issue. So keep him at the shore, keep him away at any cost, at any expense. So in my mind, this discourse needs to be redesigned. There is a need for a paradigm shift and a new localities, productions of knowledge concerning refugees, young societies, and migration at large. Now, as we all know also, migration, and allow me to read some of the notes, has long continued to shape dynamics in the MENA region as a point of origin, transit, or destination. However, the present moment, migrations flows, trends, and challenges are predominantly linked to instability and conflict. While it's true that there have been commendable global initiatives to share the responsibility of these pressing issues, the particular burden of refugees and displaced people in the MENA region continue to be dictated by their immediate geography. Viable solutions are mostly local to the region. And this is the problem that I was pointing out. As such, and in echoing our research findings at CSS, the context of migration patterns and trends in the MENA region can be synthesized into the following three key areas of investigation. First, irregular migrations patterns for unique economic, political, and social factors that interplay with each other, especially in relation to transitory migrations patterns. The second would be forced migration And the third, of course, would be labor migration. Now, within this paradigm, the status of youth is especially significant. The demographic spike that the region is enjoying in particular regard to labor migration represents a clear opportunity for making major economic leaps. The UN estimates that as many of 70% of the citizens in the Middle East are under 30, with youth between the ages of 15 and 24 making up to 22% of the population. With recent studies in economic demography find that when fertility is sharply decreasing, causing lower dependency ratios, youth entering the labor market may lead again to economic boosts. However, there are challenges. Highest youth unemployment in the world, in the region. As such, there remains a distinct need for policymakers to increase political and civic engagement to reduce sentiments of marginalization, which, of course, contribute to the phenomena of migration. The MENA paradox, gender and migration trends. This is a subtitle that I'm using in this presentation. Now, the overall level of female participation in migration is below the global average. Only 32% of all migrants in the MENA and 43% of migrants originating from MENA country are female. This lack of labor mobility reflects the gender division of labor, with women concentrated in domestic and care work, as well as the retail and hospitality. Conversely, men are concentrated in agriculture and construction. This environment leads to what the Arab Barometer, of course, we work with Princeton University to develop the Arab Barometer, term the MENA paradox of migration. Based on these gender differences in motivation for migration, one might be tempted to infer that women in the Arab world are not receiving the education they want. However, whilst general sentiments towards the education system is relatively negative throughout the region, the feelings are equal between men and women, with men slightly more dissatisfied. According to the World Bank, the ratio of female to male university enrollment in the Arab world was 1.11 in 2018, thus making lack of access to education an adequate explanation. It's clear there that economic participation is not reflective of education attainment. According to the ILO, in 2019, only 18% of women in the Arab world participated in the labor force. And check this out, 59.6 percentage points below the male labor force participation rate. These figures offer a partial explanation for Arab women's motivations for migration, in pursuit for educational opportunities and constant with the MENA paradox. Explanations for regional patterns in educational attainment and the gender division of labor could also be key to understanding decisions surrounding migration. Regarding the education system and refugees, the integration of refugee children into the host country's educational system is crucial for long-term socioeconomic welfare. This requires investments in infrastructure to mitigate any adverse effects upon native children as a result of the pressures induced by the new arrivals to the country. And therefore, one of the recommendations could be that we should address the direct effects of refugees on natives' educational outcomes, as well as its indirect outcomes, as the study prepared for the task force has shown. Now, since what's been coined now the Arab Spring 2010-11, refugee flows have been shaped by instability and conflict, particularly in Libya, Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. 83% of all Syrian refugees reside in neighboring countries. These new waves of displacements have impacted areas with already struggling waves, which has led to multi-layered and complex crises. Examples, for example, includes the Palestinian refugees crisis originating in 1948, as well as the Sudanese and Iraqi situations in the 90s and early 2000s. The protracted nature of such crises has meant that generations of refugee population continue to need protection and assistance. It is this dynamic that has shaped the politics around refugees protection and other societal policy in the region. And I would like to emphasize this again. This what actually has shaped the politics around refugee protection and the societal policy in the region. These previous ways of displacement combined with the changing nature of the conflicts creating refugees flows has meant the region is increasingly characterized by protracted displacements with no wide-scale applicable solutions. In addition, the last decade has also seen an increasingly urban asylum context, where, for example, 95% of these Syrian refugees resides in urban areas, and only 5% residing in camps. It's against this background of urban and protracted asylum that the displacement crises which emerged post the Arab Spring, if you wish, or uprising, and continued throughout the decade have unfolded and shaped the displacement trends around the world. On a more existential level, the region's lack of resources has meant that the IDPs will increase. The MENA region is the world's most water-scarce region, with climate-induced migration will serve as a future concern as the population continues to strain resources. 6% of the world population, 500 million, live in the region, with access to only 2% of the world's renewable freshwater. If current conditions persist, 2/3 of MENA countries could have less than 200 cubic meters of renewable water resources per person per year, a situation of absolute water scarcity by 2050. The situation is compounded by the fact that over 60% of MENA's water resources are generated outside the region. Now, the pandemic has highlighted the vulnerability of migrant workers in the Middle East, particularly in relation to the remittance economy, with the World Bank forecasting a 20% drop in remittances. There are a lot to be added here on the COVID, but maybe I won't go into much more details, maybe for discussions later. But this issue is worsened by the reality that most migrants in the MENA region work in the informal sector, suffering greatly since the virus. For example, the COVID-19 restrictions in the Middle East and the concomitant loss of jobs will also have a huge impact on nations like Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq populations, which heavily relies on remittances from abroad. The large influx of refugees had proven able to disturb and reframe interstate relations as well. Some nations use refugees residing in their nations as a leverage point, with others are forced to seek economic and financial support in the form of loans and grants to accommodate the growing pressure on state capacity. Due to security concerns as well, nations were forced to rethink their open borders policies, affecting the flow of goods and people, yet these closures meant that human smuggling have found a growing demand. So that just add to a very complex scene as we see this. Now, I want to share with you, this is going to be the last notes I'm presenting, the Center for Strategic Studies initiative on migrations, combining practice and theory, and it's called the Migration Hub. Now, the center, in attempting to mitigate aforementioned challenges, is taking the lead as a co-investigations on the Migration Hub project, the largest migration study to date. As I have said, South-South migration has the potential to reduce inequalities and contribute to development. This potential has yet to be fully realized. The hub works with a global network of partners in 12 countries in the global south, organized into 6 migrations corridors to transform understanding of the relationship between migration, development, and inequality. We work to shift the production of knowledge about migration and its consequences toward the countries where most migrations take place, engaging with contested concepts and definitions, decolonizing research processes, and generating new evidence and ideas. Our ultimate aim is to translate knowledge and ideas into policies and practices which work to improve the lives of migrants, their families, and the communities in which they live. I leave you with here, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaid. Indeed, the subject of migration and young societies, and also all the points that you two raised and earlier presenters on the subject of our task force. We almost reach an end in this webinar. However, I would like to give the floor now to the Vice President and Head of Research at CAPSARC, Dr. Fahd Turki, to give his closing remark for this webinar.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thanks, Muhammad. Welcome, everybody. And I very much enjoyed the discussion today on migration and young society. Our 9th task force. I think this is definitely, as Dr. Zaid mentioned, this is definitely an important topic for the region. The region have suffered from many factors that created incentive for migration. And I think the view of the region is reflected in the policy briefs of this task force. Dr. Zaid mentioned one main concern, which I think the T20 actually tried to resolve, and that is the mismatch between where the research is done and where is the policy recommendations are being developed, and where it's applied and where it is needed. And I think the T20 provides that platform for all countries, all views, to have the opportunity to deliver their policy recommendations and views to the G20 leaders. I'm happy to say that in G20 Saudi Arabia, continuing on the legacy of the previous T20s, and more than 500 institutions participated from 80 countries, not only the G20 countries. But I second what Dr. Zaid said in terms of encouraging the views of non-G20 countries, not only during the Saudi presidency, but also moving forward into the Italian presidencies. And we heard today in the beginning of the webinar from Paolo Magri, the future chair of T20 Italy, into next year. We heard that there is a great commitment to continue the legacy issues. And I think both Saudi Arabia and Italy share more or less the same region in the Mediterranean or in the Middle East. And I look forward to engaging our Middle East partners into the discussion into next year. Thank you, Dr. Zaid, for very insightful views on an important issue for the region. And I would like to also thank you for co-hosting our 9th webinar. And this is an honor for us in Saudi as a think tank community, as well as for the T20 community. So thanks for agreeing on participating. I want to touch base on a number of issues that have been highlighted today. I mean, the aspiration for this task force, which is one of our proposals in the T20, in the communique that will be released by October 31st and November 1st, is definitely to reduce global inequalities in the face of a health crisis by maintaining access to educational and economic opportunities for all. And under this aspirational theme, there have been a number of recommendations that have been put forward by the task forces, especially this task force on the issue of migration and young society. Access to education, improving the G20, one of the recommendations is that the G20 should promote social cohesion at different phases of demographic transitions, and mitigate the negative impact of aging population on fiscal sustainability. Education, as highlighted also by Dr. Zaid, is one of the main concerns in this area. And one of the main recommendations that is definitely going to be on the T20 communique that will be delivered to the G20 is to increase funding for innovative education solutions that meet the needs of today's youth. So it's not only access to education, it's the quality of the education. It's the need of the today's education, not the yesterday's education. And there is definitely a need to create conditions to prevent future education losses, be it in developing or developed nations. And last but not least, one of the main points that I wrote down from today's discussion is to assist reintegration of migration workers to their home countries. And I think that also is an important issue that needs to be considered. I know we've been together for 3 hours, and I very much enjoyed the whole discussion today. This is our 9th task force, and we will have another task force webinar this week on Thursday on sustainable resources. And then another task force next week, task force 11, multidisciplinary approach to complex problems with a focus on COVID-19 pandemic. And then we will conclude the summit season with a 2-day summit in October 31 and November 1st. I invite you all to attend all of these webinars and participate in the discussion. But I would like to take a moment on behalf of the T20 Secretariat, to thank the leadership teams on this task force. Special thanks to Her Royal Highness Princess Maha on volunteering to take this role of leading the task force with the priorities and the issues, which is, as she mentioned to me, this is a close topic to her heart. So I think the recommendation that comes from it will definitely see a push from the university, King Faisal University here in Riyadh, to promote these recommendations during and beyond the G20 of Saudi Arabia. I would like to thank also our coordinator, Muhammad, who helped during the year on bringing us together, the co-chairs and the secretariat. A special thanks to our dear co-chairs for their contribution and also putting up with our requests of review and requests of presentations and so on. We are strong believers in a bottom-up approach. And for that, we thank everybody within the task force for building up the policy recommendations, building up the policy briefs, and that will be reflected definitely in the communique that will be handed to the G20 at the last day of the summit. I would like to also thank our team who's working behind the scene of making this event happen as smooth as it does. There was a major transition between pre-COVID and through COVID. We're not yet after COVID. And without the team behind the scene that worked hard on coordinating all the efforts, bringing us together virtually. And so special thank goes to them. And last but not least, our co-leading institutions who supported us in organizing these events, CAPSARC and KF CRIS, for both organizing and financing the T20 Saudi Arabia. I would like to conclude by reminding you or an open invitation to attend our next webinar on sustainable resources on Thursday, the same time at this time. And until then, have a great day, and we'll see you soon, inshallah. Ma salama.
As-salama. Thank you very much.
Bye.